Well, hey, Josh, thank you so much for joining us on the Joshua Wilderness Survival Podcast. It's been a blessing to have you here this week, just pouring into us and giving us your wisdom. Before we start, can you just give us a little bit more info on your connection to Hume and your connection to Joshua?
Sure. And it's great to be here. So I have a long connection to Hume through my wife. So my wife's family were one of the early kind of builders of a house here, and they were Jewish Holocaust survivors who became believers in Jesus in the 1940s, and built a house up here, kind of, I think, a retreat from the heat. Yeah. So my wife came up here every year, and then I've been in and around Hume, I don't know, for the last 20 years. And so I've had a lot of connections, a lot of friends, was a good friend with one of the previous directors. So, yeah, a lot of connection.
Awesome. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about the ministry that you and your wife work in.
Yeah, so we are both on staff as full-time missionaries with Jews for Jesus. Jews for Jesus is a organization that's about 50 years old, and we are a mission that focuses on reaching out to Jewish people and sharing the gospel of Jesus, and that Jesus is the Messiah. Our missionary staff are all Jewish. So we're Jews speaking to other Jews, although there's a lot of people on staff that work in support roles that are not Jewish and just are kind of, supportive of the mission. We're in, I think, 12 countries. We have about just under 300 staff around the world, and the majority of our staff are not in the United States. And so we're doing lots of different things in lots of different languages, reaching out to Jewish people around the world.
That's beautiful. What are your locations in the States?
In the U.S., it's just Los Angeles and New York.
Perfect. Yeah. And what do you have in the U.S.? Or, sorry, not the U.S., L.A. What do you have in L.A.?
Okay, so I live in Los Angeles, right? And so my wife and I both are there. And so in L.A., we've had an outreach in L.A. for 40 years. And so it's kind of gone through various seasons. And so the season that we're in right now is we own a building in Westwood, which is near the campus of UCLA. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we went through a transition. So I was leading the branch at that point. We went through a transition to move from kind of on-the-street proclamation, handing out literature, kind of having all these conversations, sort of ministry to a art gallery, coffee shop, recording studio. So to sort of bring a lot of the work together. And the reason for that was that all the proclamation stuff really stopped working. Yeah. And so what we needed was another way to communicate to people. And so coffee and art and community became that way. So we have a cafe. It's called Upside Down. It's in Westwood, and we serve great coffee, and you'll see it in a couple of weeks when we're down there. And a lot of the ministry happens through that space. Yeah.
That's awesome. You did mention earlier this week that the coffee shop is based off of based off of donation. Yeah. I'm really intrigued by that. How has that kept up in a coffee shop?
Right. Yeah. You're kind of a business guy, right? Yeah, so that's how does that even work?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's interesting. It's a little counterintuitive. So you wouldn't think that this would be the way it would work. And we're serving good coffee. So it's not like our ingredients are cheap. And we put a lot into the prep, we put a lot into the staff, a lot into the coffee. And what we found was that by presenting a pay-by-donation model, what happens is some people are thankful and they pay $1 or $2. Some people, for a $5 cup of coffee, will pay $10, sometimes $20. So as we kind of reconcile our expenses and what we get in these donations, it actually equals out. We've never once in 5 years not covered salaries, costs, materials.
Wow.
We're not making a lot of money, but that's never been our goal, right? So
I'm intrigued by the art side of that. What does that look like in y'all's ministry?
Yeah. So we do between 4 and 6 art shows a year,
Wow.
and usually 6. And we have one each year that we try and focus on UCLA artists. So we reach out to art students at UCLA, and they can come here and have an actual gallery and have a show and display it, and so their friends can come and see.
Yeah.
So we have a gallery show, like I said, every 6 months, and there'll be different themes, and then they'll stay up for about 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months, and so we'll have different events that are coordinated to that. So we have an opening show. Often we have an artist talk back on Sundays where we bring the artists in and people can come, and we serve coffee there and different things. We usually do a podcast or two related to the art project. And sometimes, we've done this a couple times, we actually commission the art. So then we own all of the art, and then that becomes a show that we can take on the road. Because we have a similar gallery in New York City and a similar gallery in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. So we've had work from the Tel Aviv artists come and show here.
That's awesome.
And they've got friends who are living in LA because we have a big Israeli community in LA, and that brings more people in.
That's awesome. Have you noticed a difference in dynamic between the LA site, the New York City site, and the Tel Aviv site?
Totally different.
Wow.
More different than you could ever imagine.
What does that look like?
Yeah, it was kind of a surprise. It's a good question because we kind of thought, okay, here's a bunch of people who are kind of artistically minded. So they do have some similarities. But artists that live in LA just have a very different way that they see the world than artists that live in New York, for example. So the art world in New York is kind of... it's a New York art world, so it's a little more avant-garde. It's a little bit more risky. LA is kind of like loves the vibe of like hanging out and being cool and thinking about inclusion and all of these ideas. And Tel Aviv, I don't know if people realize this, but Tel Aviv has an incredibly vibrant art scene, and it always has. So Tel Aviv is a place where artists working in lots of different mediums can come and do art and engage with other artists. We own a building in South Tel Aviv that is our art space. And we've had as many as 150 people in at one time. Wow. So if we have a show in an evening, there could be 1,000, 1,500 people that kind of come and go over the course of the time. Yeah.
Wow.
It's cool.
So I'm very inspired by the time that you have spent in this ministry, you and your wife. What are some struggles that you have learned from with the time in ministry, maybe some setbacks?
Yeah. So we're 30 years, a little over 30 years full-time on staff. Wow. So that's a long time. And it's even longer than I would have imagined all of those years ago. I guess a few things that I would say is that we've always kind of had to ask ourselves every 3 years, 4 years or something, is this still what I want to do? So there's kind of been a seasonal reevaluation of our calling. And sometimes we were kind of hoping for something else, but usually not, because it's always kind of been a place where we've found a lot of joy. So there's never been a point where God has led us somewhere else. We've thought about some other opportunities, and we partner with a lot of other ministries and churches, so we get to do different things. But it's that sort of reaffirmation of our calling that's helpful. Second thing is to realize that the difficulties and the challenges have always been temporary. So there's never really been a time that it's been just horrible.
Yeah.
Now, there have been days that have been horrible or challenging, but the challenges are always temporary, and the blessings are always enduring.
Yeah.
And so, what you have to do, like for us in ministry over these years, you kind of have to ride out the difficult times so that you can get the perspective that those difficult times don't last forever. Because when you're in the middle of it, it just feels like this is the way it is forever, you know? So having some maturity and experience. And then the third thing I would say is change. Things are always changing. So in our ministry, the Jewish community is changing. The values are changing. Our methods are changing. How we think about the people around us are changing. Our staff are changing. So you have to be ready to accept a world that's always kind of moving. You know, this is not a static kind of environment.
Just kind of like the change in LA that y'all made from the streets. Now you're a coffee shop.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny. There were people who, when we were going through this change, that said, you know, this is terrible. So whenever you go through change, there's always going to be people, even sometimes yourself, that says, nah, that's not a good idea. But if you've done the diligent work of observation and seeing what's going on around you and adapting to those changes and building kind of different models, and you've done that work, you need to kind of trust the work that it will lead you into this new area. Yeah.
That's awesome. My next question is, could you elaborate on maybe your walk with Christ? And an addition to that question is, what made your heart so strong for this ministry?
Yeah, I mean, my own. That's a good question. My own spiritual life, I would say, I'm pretty connected to God in the kind of common spiritual disciplines and things like that. I read the Bible regularly. I pray. I meditate on God's word and the world around me. We're very involved in our local church, so I'm an elder there for now, and my wife is involved in the women's ministry, all of that stuff. And so we have a lot of connections that way. I think for me, I've also needed to kind of develop a bit of a kind of this sort of deeper resilience in my own life, because our ministry does face a fair amount of resistance and kind of pushback. So what I've really loved are kind of long, extended, deep times of either in prayer or in scripture. So instead of reading the Bible for maybe 20 minutes, I might kind of take an afternoon. Now, I can't do that all the time, but when I do, it's just it really feeds my soul when that kind of thing happens. And keeping our heart attuned to God is actually the thing that keeps your heart attuned to ministry. Because they're woven together. You know, there's not a time when I can just kind of sort of go in and punch the clock and do the work and then go home and, you know, then do my other life. That's not the way ministry works. Your life and your ministry sort of move in and out of each other, always. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
What got you into this ministry? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I'm Jewish, right? So I grew up in a Jewish home, became a believer at 18. Your age, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so my family are not Christians. So Jews for Jesus was sort of a home for me as a place of my own identity, to be able to kind of have a community of people like me, who were also Jewish, who also, most of them had no family who were believers. We were all kind of activist-oriented people, so we liked doing stuff. We liked adventure, and so it just really fit. Yeah. So then it, you know, I kind of became a student, and then became an intern, and then became staff, and then kind of moved forward. So Yeah, so it's just kind of kept me going all of these years.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Josh, I really appreciate your time today, and I really appreciate you and your wife's time with us this week. It's been a huge blessing to have you all speak with us and just go through simple things like Passover with us that we would not have been able to hear from anyone else except if y'all came. So I'm really grateful of your time here, and thank you for joining us today. And
Cool.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.